You ever look at a dog and think, yeah, man's best friend, loyal, fluffy, adorable. But what if I told you that same dog, its ancient ancestor, was trained to rip out throats on command? What if I told you that before animals became our companions, they were our weapons? Not just pets, not just partners, weapons. Early humans weren't just hunters, they were tacticians, strategists, and they figured out a way to turn the wildest beasts into tools of war and survival. This isn't the story of cuddly animal domestication. This is the dark, brutal, and absolutely brilliant history of how early humans trained animals to kill. Let's dive in. The first killers on a leash. It all starts with the wolf. Thousands of years ago, before civilization, before agriculture, humans and wolves circled each other like rivals. Both apex predators, both territorial, both obsessed with meat. But somehow, through a mix of shared goals, scraps of meat, and a whole lot of trial and error, those wolves started hanging around our camps. But here's the thing nobody talks about. This wasn't just about companionship. This was about survival. Early humans saw potential. They weren't thinking, "Aw, cute doggo." They were thinking, this beast could take down prey or enemies. We didn't just domesticate wolves, we weaponized them. These animals were trained to track, corner, and maul. And if you think that's exaggerated, just look at the archaeological evidence. Ancient burial sites have been found with dogs buried alongside warriors, sometimes even with armor. These weren't pets, these were killing partners. Imagine the edge that gave early tribes in warfare. While their enemies were throwing rocks, they were unleashing teeth and muscle. And yes, these proto-dogs weren't golden retrievers. They were closer to murder machines with fur. Birds of prey, death from above. Now let's talk air support. Because yeah, humans didn't stop at land. Somewhere in Central Asia, thousands of years ago, early nomads looked at eagles and hawks and thought, I bet I could use that. Welcome to the origins of falconry. But again, forget the fancy medieval nobles with their hooded birds and velvet gloves. The real origin was raw, gritty, and entirely about survival. Golden eagles, massive, vicious, and terrifying, were trained to dive bomb prey. Foxes, hares, even wolves. Yes, wolves. Picture this, a bird with an 8-foot wingspan, talons like daggers, and the precision of a guided missile, all under human command. This wasn't sport, this was strategy. You train a predator to take out another predator, and suddenly you've got a weapon that strikes with surprise and speed. No warning, no sound, just talons and chaos. And the level of trust and control involved, that's what makes it so mind-blowing. Early humans found a way to collaborate with apex predators. Not tame them, not control them, collaborate. Who even thinks of that? That's not just primitive instinct, that's genius. Elephants, living tanks of the ancient world. Okay, now we're scaling things up, literally. Elephants. These weren't just massive animals used for transport. In ancient times, especially in India, Persia, and parts of Africa, elephants were trained to become weapons of mass destruction. War elephants. Think about that phrase. It's so absurd, it almost sounds like fantasy. But it's real. Armored, tusk-modified, battle-hardened elephants were used to trample enemy lines, swing warriors on their backs, and cause absolute panic on the battlefield. Now yes, this isn't quite prehistoric, but it is ancient, and the methods of training these giants go way, way back. You had to break them, mentally, physically, then teach them commands. Some were taught to impale, others were taught to grab and throw. These animals weren't just war machines, they were psychological weapons. Imagine standing in a battlefield with no gun, no armor, and a 6-ton elephant is charging at you with spears strapped to its tusks. Yeah, you'd run. But here's the key idea. Early humans didn't just adapt to nature, they co-opted it. They looked at the biggest, baddest thing around and said, I can make that fight for me. And they did. Cats that kill, the leopard whisperers. You probably didn't expect cats to be on this list, but they are. And not just because they're jerks who knock over glasses. In ancient Egypt and parts of India, leopards were actually trained. Yes, leopards. Not lions, not tigers, leopards. Sleek, stealthy, silent. The perfect assassin. Elite hunters in noble courts trained these big cats to help hunt game. But again, this wasn't about food. This was about status. This was about power. You showed up to a royal hunt with a sword and a bow? Cute! The real elite brought a leash with a leopard at the end of it. These cats were trained to stalk and kill on cue. Some were even partially tamed to walk beside humans. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Leopards are not easy to train. They're solitary, aggressive, and unpredictable. So the fact that early humans even tried, let alone succeeded, tells you something. It tells you that from the very beginning, humans weren't just adapting to nature. We were trying to bend it, to dominate it. And if that meant teaming up with a wild cat to prove a point, so be it.
Sea monsters on command, the strange case of war dolphins. You want a twist? Here's your twist. Humans didn't stop at land and sky. They went into the water too. Now this one's more recent and admittedly controversial, but even in ancient times, there are legends, especially among Greek and Roman sailors, of dolphins being trained to assist in warfare, distracting enemy ships, guiding boats, even dragging drowning men to shore, or under. And while the modern military has definitely used dolphins for tasks like mine detection or surveillance, the roots of that idea are ancient. The key pattern here? Humans looked at every environment and thought, how can I make something here fight for me? Land? Dogs. Sky? Birds. Sea? Dolphins. We weren't just surviving, we were innovating, weaponizing life itself. Boars and beasts, the chaos of wild swine. Alright, this one's wild, literally. We don't usually think of pigs as dangerous, but wild boars, totally different story. Razor-sharp tusks, muscle-packed bodies, an attitude that screams, "Fight me!" In parts of ancient Europe and Asia, there are accounts, some myth, some possibly rooted in truth, of humans raising semi-domesticated boars, not just for food, but for defense. Imagine your village under attack. No cavalry, no reinforcements, just you and a dozen territorial, angry boars trained to charge anything that isn't familiar. It sounds crazy, but think about how effective that chaos would be. Boars are fast, hard to control, and fearless. Early humans may not have had perfect control over them, but that wasn't the point. The goal was to weaponize unpredictability. You didn't need the boar to obey. You just needed it to run in the general direction of your enemies and let the rest do the nature. It's like setting off a landmine with legs. Camels, desert brutes with a bad attitude. Camels might seem like chill desert taxis now, but don't be fooled. These animals are strong, stubborn, and absolutely capable of destruction. In ancient Arabian warfare, camels weren't just used for transport, they were trained to charge, to kick, and to scare the hell out of enemy horses. You see, horses, normally brave in battle, hate the smell of camels. The scent messes with them, makes them panic. Which means if you're an ancient desert tribe and you roll up with a squad of armored camels, you've already turned the tide of battle before a single spear is thrown. Some historians believe camel-mounted warriors trained their animals not just for intimidation, but for aggression, biting, trampling, pushing through tight lines. It's another example of how early humans didn't just use animals, they studied their behavior and figured out how to turn it into a tactical advantage. Hyenas, Africa's forgotten monsters in training. Now let's talk about one of the most underrated and underdocumented cases of animal weaponization: hyenas. In parts of ancient North and East Africa, there are whispered legends and fringe evidence that certain tribes, particularly in Ethiopia and Somalia, captured and raised hyenas, not as pets, not as hunters, as guard animals. And if that sounds sketchy, consider this: hyenas are smart, like shockingly smart. They can be trained, they have social hierarchies, and they're known to respond to human cues when raised young. They also have the strongest bite of any mammal their size, stronger than lions, capable of crunching through bone like it's a breadstick. So yes, the idea of training hyenas as living security systems is both terrifying and brilliant. Imagine being an early villager trying to protect your family at night. You don't have alarms, you don't have locks, but you do have a trained pack of nocturnal carnivores who don't like strangers. Yeah, good luck raiding that settlement. Ape allies, the rumors of simian soldiers. This one's murkier, more myth than fact, but it's too fascinating to ignore. In ancient Southeast Asia and parts of Africa, there are stories, some oral tradition, some carved into old stone, of early humans attempting to train primates for war. Apes, baboons, even chimpanzees. Now, training an ape to fight, that's risky, but apes are intellect, coordinated, capable of learning patterns, and if you raise one from infancy, you can establish dominance. There are speculative accounts of primates being used to throw rocks, retrieve weapons, or simply cause chaos among enemy troops. Again, this isn't well documented, but it reflects a larger pattern. Humans constantly looking at nature and asking, can I make that fight for me? Whether it's myth or memory, the point stands. The human imagination for weaponizing the animal kingdom knew no bounds. Reptilian rumors, crocodile guardians, and snake defenses. Let's go even deeper into the wild. In ancient Egypt and parts of the Amazon, there were cults and communities that worshipped and possibly trained crocodiles and snakes as sacred guardians. Now, you're not going to put a leash on a croc, but some records suggest humans would build moats and ponds filled with semi-domesticated crocodiles, creatures that recognized their feeders and were more tolerant of their presence. The idea? Use them like biological landmines. Intruder crosses into your territory at night? Snap! Dragged under, gone without a sound. And as for snakes, particularly venomous ones like cobras, there are stories of priests and shamans using them in both ritual and protection. Some even claim snakes were conditioned to stay in certain chambers, acting as organic traps for the uninvited. Again, some of this veers into the mythic, but the intention was real. Train nature to act as your first line of defense. Build your security system with scales and fangs instead of bricks and cameras. It's creepy, it's genius, and it's so human.
But now let's ask the deeper question. Why? Why go through the effort, the danger, the trial and error of training a killer animal? Because power. That's it. That's the answer. Power. Early humans were obsessed with leveling the playing field. We were squishy, slow, and relatively weak. No claws, no fangs, no fur. But we had one thing that trumped all of that: a brain wired for control. When you train an animal to kill, you don't just gain a physical advantage, you gain psychological dominance over prey, over enemies, over your own tribe. Think about it. A man with a sword is dangerous. A man with a sword and a pack of trained wolves? Terrifying. He's not just a warrior, he's a force of nature. It's the same instinct that leads warlords to ride into battle with lions on chains, or mafia bosses to keep killer dogs in cages. It's not just about protection, it's about intimidation. It's about showing the world that you command death itself. That instinct? It's ancient, primal, and it started when someone, somewhere, decided to teach a predator to listen.
Before animals became our companions, they were weapons. Early humans didn't just survive, they strategized. They looked at the wildest, most dangerous animals around and asked, "Can I make that fight for me?" And they did. It started with wolves. Early humans and wolves were both predators, but instead of fighting, they teamed up. Those wolves weren't cuddly pets. They were trained killers, used to hunt, guard, and even fight in wars. Burial sites show armored dogs buried beside warriors. These were early war dogs. Then came birds of prey. Nomads in Central Asia trained golden eagles, giant birds with 8-foot wingspans, to dive bomb and kill prey. This wasn't sport, it was survival. Humans didn't tame these apex predators, they partnered with them. Elephants were living tanks. In India, Persia, and Africa, elephants were trained for war, charged into battle, armored, tusks modified for destruction. These beasts weren't just powerful, they were psychological weapons. Leopards joined the ranks too. In ancient Egypt and India, elite hunters trained leopards to kill on command. Wild, silent animals made into silent assassins. It wasn't easy, but it proved humans could bend nature to their will. Even the seas weren't safe. Legends tell of dolphins trained by ancient navies to mislead enemy ships or drown enemies. It sounds wild, but it shows humans saw every environment as a potential battlefield. Wild boars were chaos on hooves. Some ancient villages may have unleashed trained boars to defend their land. Not obedient pets, just unpredictable, furious beasts sent charging into enemies. Camels weren't just for riding. Arab warriors used them to intimidate and scatter horses in battle. Their smell alone disrupted enemy lines. Some were trained to bite and trample too. Hyenas may have been used as guards. In parts of Africa, tribes reportedly raised hyenas as nighttime protectors. Smart, bone-crushing creatures acting as natural security systems. And there are myths of apes in war. From Southeast Asia to Africa, stories tell of primates trained to throw rocks, create chaos, or scare enemies. Primitive, but clever. Even reptiles played a role. Some ancient societies built moats with crocodiles or used cobras as living traps. Not tame, but taught to stay put and attack intruders. In the end, it wasn't just survival, it was innovation. Early humans saw animals not just as food or friends, but as tools, as allies, as weapons.